against them.
Total chaos, with flashes going on all over the place, shells exploding. On the way, you saw some Germans in slit trenches, but you've been told not to stop, to keep going. You saw one of your tanks in front of you hit and going up in flames. You saw another one hit, going up in flames. You didn't know what was happening. You kept going, you kept going.
By dawn on August 8th, Canadian and British forces have captured most of Verrières Ridge. By noon, the entire position is in Allied hands. Phase 1 of Operation Totalize is a success, opening the way for the Allies to advance and hook up with U.S. forces further south. On August 21st, after 2 more weeks of fierce fighting, the Allies finally complete their encirclement of the German army in Normandy. Those Germans who remained trapped inside the pocket are now easy prey for the Allies' superior air power.
And for a while, this tremendous slaughter, you can only call it, went on.
More and more bombers and fighter bombers attacked. The misery around us screamed to high heaven. Refugees and soldiers from the defeated German armies looked helplessly at the bombers flying continuously overhead. It was useless to take cover from the bursting shells and bombs. Concentrated in such a confined space, we offered once-in-a-lifetime targets to the enemy air power. Death scattered us at every step. We stood out like targets on a range. It was impossible to miss us.
The destruction of the German army in France marks the end of the Battle of Normandy. German losses are horrific. 200,000 are killed or wounded, and 1,300 tanks are destroyed. Normandy has become a graveyard for the once mighty German panzers. Of the 12th SS Panzer Division, only 10 tanks and 300 men are reported to have escaped, including Kurt Meyer, who was later put on trial for war crimes, including the killing of 18 Canadian prisoners at the Abbaye d'Ardennes. But he spends just 9 years in prison. For the Allies, the Battle of Normandy is a great victory, but it comes at a steep price. 50,000 men are killed, and over 150,000 are wounded. In the Battle of Normandy, the Sherbrooke Fusiliers suffer some of their heaviest losses of the war. Many still wonder how they survived.
You know, I've been in tanks that were knocked out, but the shell didn't hit where I was. I've been in mortar barrages, but no mortar came down where I was. It's just dumb luck. I think everybody would agree on that. You've got to be skillful, you've got to be thoughtful and careful and all of that. But if you're not lucky, you're not going to make it.
March 2003. U.S. Special Forces lead Peshmerga guerrillas to open a crucial second front in Gulf War II. (1943). British agents parachute into occupied France to prepare for the D-Day invasion. 2 critical and highly dangerous operations, 60 years apart, both involving the most secretive type of warfare, special operations. Special operations call for a special type of warrior, independent, smart, ultra-fit, and ruthless. trained for military and intelligence operations, often clandestine, deep behind enemy lines. Highly capable and always on a knife edge. The battle plan is Special Operations. Europe, June 1942. Nazi forces dominate the continent. With both the Soviet Union and the United States now in the war, the Western Allies start preparing to invade northwest France. For the first crucial days, their forces will be perilously outnumbered, particularly by Hitler's elite panzer divisions. How can they prevent the Germans concentrating their armor against the planned beachhead in Normandy? Middle East, 2003. As the United States and its allies finally prepare to oust Saddam Hussein from Iraq, their initial plan is thrown into disarray when a NATO ally decides to bar coalition troops from its territory. How can the situation be saved? The answer in France in World War II and Iraq in Gulf War II is the same. Special Operations.
Special operations are those operations that are carried out by specially trained troops to identify, destroy, or disrupt enemy positions and perhaps also human assets that usually have a strategic implication.
Special Operations Forces can operate as an integral part of a larger battle plan, gathering intelligence, raiding, or seizing key objectives. But sometimes they can be so strategically vital, the special operation becomes a battle plan in itself. Particularly today, in the global war against terror. In all cases, commanders must take special care to fulfill certain highly specific factors. Objective. There should be no other feasible way of achieving the particular goal. If conventional military means are an option, they will usually be less hazardous. The decision to use special operations must also take into account the need for secrecy.
Special operations are conducted under the great sort of veil of secrecy, because what you don't want to do is to give away what your standard operating procedures are, your tactics, your techniques, because this is a gift to the enemy.
Build up. The right type of people must be trained and put in place, often far behind enemy lines, and sometimes over a long time. And they must have the right equipment. Insertion. Special operations are so secret, planners must ensure the arrival of their forces does not give the game away. Execution. Since the build-up phase of a special operation can take years, this can overlap with execution. But when the moment comes to strike, the execution must be faultless. In most armed forces, special operations are all those undertaken by elite and secretive organizations, such as Britain's Special Air Service. In the United States, the Special Operations Group includes a whole range of units from every branch of the military, like the Army Delta Force and Navy SEALs. Within the Special Operations Group, the term Special Forces has a very precise meaning. They are the Army's Green Berets, trained specifically to work with indigenous forces.
Special Forces soldiers are assigned to a specific part of the world, and they spend their entire career studying the language and the culture of that region. Then when they're needed, they can go in, raise and train an indigenous force to fight there.
London, 1941. British General Frederick Morgan is ordered to begin planning the invasion of Europe. He and his team know German forces in France will make this the most perilous operation of the war. Somehow, they must even the odds. The Middle East, 2003. 11 years after Gulf War I. Coalition Commander U.S. General Tommy Frank's plan to oust Saddam Hussein has hit a major problem. In both cases, the planners decide the solution requires non-conventional means. Now they must consider the first requirement in the battle plan for special operations. Objective. What is the reason for involving special forces? And are they really the best way of achieving these specific goals? On D-Day, Allied commanders plan to land 6 seaborne and 3 airborne divisions in Normandy on a single day, and then pour in reinforcements and resupplies. But facing them will be the formidable defenses of Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel leading 30 infantry and 6 elite panzer divisions. If these can be concentrated against the Allied beachhead in the first few days, they might easily annihilate it. So the Allied planners adopt a dual approach. A massive deception campaign to keep the Germans guessing where the invasion will come, and the use of special operations to disrupt German reinforcements trying to get to the battlefield. But France is occupied. No organization exists to do this. So Allied commanders decide to use special operations to set one up. In 2003, it would be called insurgency. In 1942, they called it the resistance.
This special operations campaign was unprecedented, both for its size and for the variety of things it was being asked to do. Normandy is the moment where you see special operations go off and finally be appreciated as a recognizable and respectable form of warfare.
The role of resistance is not random sabotage. From the start, its efforts are totally focused on D-Day, especially intelligence gathering about the strength of the German Atlantic Wall and the location of German units. But the ultimate objective of the resistance and the special operations forces working with it is the interruption of German reinforcements by any means possible.
Various teams were given different targets, transportation networks, command and control centers, etc. The objective was to stop the German reinforcements from defeating the landings.
The Allied plan has 3 stages. Years before the invasion date is fixed, they send in leaders, radio operators, and sabotage and explosives experts to set up, train, and equip resistance networks throughout France. They also parachute in supplies, weapons, and explosives, and arrange to conceal them until D-Day arrives. This initial special operation campaign is conducted by the British SOE, the Special Operations Executive, and the American OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner of today's CIA. It is a clandestine war of secret hiding places, furtive meetings, and constant vigilance. One slip can mean capture, torture, and almost certain death. The second phase is the night before D-Day. As the massive Allied invasion fleet slips across the English Channel, Special Forces teams parachute in to coordinate resistance activities and also conduct their own operations. The third stage continues disruption and sabotage during the weeks after the landings. In Europe, from 1942 to 1944, planners have met the first requirement in the battle plan for special operations: clear long-term objectives which can only be met by using special forces. 60 years later, As he prepares to oust Saddam Hussein, U.S. General Tommy Franks is suddenly forced to completely rethink his use of special operations. Instead of just supporting Franks' overall battle plan, special operations will be thrust into a leading role, responsible for the entire Second Front against Iraq's formidable army. Iraq, 2003. U.S. General Tommy Franks' battle plan to oust Saddam Hussein is a two-front war. One arm of his forces, 4 U.S. and 1 British division, will invade from Kuwait, driving toward Baghdad from the south. A second arm, the U.S. 4th Infantry, will transit through Turkey and advance on Baghdad from the north. Special operations units are assigned integral and vital tasks in both theaters, carrying out their classic raiding and reconnaissance roles. In the north, there is another element of special operations: coordination with the fiercely anti-Saddam forces of the Kurds. Since Gulf War I, Western powers have been helping protect the Kurds. Now America will send CIA and Special Forces advisors to help organize the Peshmerga. But the key element of Frank's battle plan in the north is the U.S. 4th Infantry Division. Special Forces would only be setting the stage. Then on March 1st, just 3 weeks before the projected D-Day, with the 4th Infantry already at sea, Turkey withdraws permission for the U.S. troops to land. Suddenly, the entire battle plan is in jeopardy. Without the northern assault, Saddam could shift many divisions based there to boost his defenses against the coalition attack from the south. Franks rethinks quickly and changes the objective of the whole Special Forces operation in northern Iraq. Instead of coordinating the Kurdish Peshmerga to support the main attack by 4th Infantry Division, they become the main force. What Franks is relying on is the vital spin-off effect of Special Forces operations: force multiplication.
Special Forces allow a tremendous economy of force. With 12 men, they raise a battalion. So you invest 12 men and you get back between 500 and 1,000.
In 2003, Franks is confident that U.S. Special Operations leadership and organization, plus the latest in high-tech weapons, would enable the Peshmerga to tie down the Iraqi divisions in the north.
Paradoxically, the Turkish decision not to allow the passage of the 4th Infantry Division was a great boon for the American Special Operations Forces. It allowed that community to show its full range of capabilities. In effect, it broadened the American understanding of what Special Operations Forces could do.
Over 60 years earlier, the Normandy invasion planners had less experience to go on. Winston Churchill had set up SOE and the Commandos in 1940 to set Europe ablaze. Now General Morgan and his planners will use them to multiply the force through the French resistance. They reason that well-targeted attacks by small groups will cause enormous disruption and tie down disproportionate numbers of German troops. But for the Special Operations battle plans to succeed in 1944 or 2003, the planners must ensure that they have solved the second crucial factor: build-up. The right people and equipment must be put in place. In Europe in 1942, Allied planners face a problem. To stand any chance of even surviving, let alone setting up a resistance network, the agents they send into France must speak French fluently. This rules out the military, but the agents must have military skills. The British Special Operations Executive recruits civilians and trains them for the dirty war of a resistance agent. Self-defense, radio communication, sabotage, assassination, parachute jumping. In Europe in 1942, the Allies have no choice. They send an army of civilian special ops agents, men and women, into occupied France. But they do have the time needed to build up the necessary forces. In Iraq in 2003, Franks has very little time. But he does have one enormous advantage. CIA and Special Forces teams have been working with the Kurds for years. So a pool of some of the best special ops units in the world is already in place. The U.S. Special Operations Group, the British SAS and SBS, and other coalition forces have been honing their skills for years. In both cases, in World War II and Gulf War II, it's time for the next stage in the battle plan for special operations. Insertion. Special operations are so secret, planners must ensure that insertion does not give the game away. England, 1943. An unmarked car slips quietly onto a secret airfield. Inside is a woman agent about to be inserted into occupied France. Some agents parachute in. Others are taken in by light plane or boat. Iraq, 2003. Coalition Special Operations personnel move in by land and air. Other squads practice seaborne assaults on oil terminals in the south. It's classic special operations. France, 1941. The civilian special ops agents have 3 years to organize, arm, and train the French resistance, if they can stay alive that long. In Iraq, time is the one luxury Coalition Commander U.S. General Tommy Franks does not have. He's just completely revised his entire battle plan. The moment when he'll have to push the go button and send his forces into action is closing fast. In Europe, from 1941, agents are being secretly inserted into occupied France to pave the way for the D-Day invasion. In Iraq in 2003, U.S. General Tommy Franks is finalizing his plans to oust Saddam Hussein from power. Whether it comes in weeks or years, the next factor in the battle plan for special operations will be critical. Execution. When the moment for action arrives, it must be carried out faultlessly. In France, the Allied agents preparing the resistance have no idea when the invasion will come, or how long they'll be living underground, just one step ahead of the Gestapo that's hunting them down. The Germans use tracking devices to detect radios transmitting back to London. Networks are penetrated, loyalties betrayed.
Danger came not only from the Gestapo and the other German occupation authorities, but from the competition that existed between the various factions of the French resistance. Betrayal was a constant danger, and the consequences could be dire.
Agents disappear into Gestapo headquarters in Paris and Lyon. Then, if they survive, into concentration camps.
They were facing one of the most ruthless forces on record, and they knew the consequences of being captured were to either be tortured to death or shot on sight.
But gradually the networks are built up. Gradually the resistance is armed and equipped and waiting. 2003, special operations teams begin to infiltrate across Iraq's borders to send back intelligence or identify targets. In the Kurdish areas, the teams already working there are reinforced. They come with dazzling new technology, brand new ground mobility vehicles, GMVs, oversized and modified Humvees with massive firepower and mobility, war pigs to resupply them in the middle of battle. Javelin missiles, lethal against vehicles, and crucially, Saddam's armor. And they can call in precision strikes from formidable air power. Most coalition warplanes now carry weapons guided by laser or the Global Positioning System, GPS. Even so-called dumb bombs can be guided within a few feet of their target.
As a result, we get a devastating combined effect. By itself, the airplane can't find the target. By itself, the team is too small to attack the target. Put the two together with a ground person lasing for the aircraft, and you get a devastating impact on the target.
But there's something else which marks this as a crossroads and breakthrough in special operations.
The role of special operations in North Iraq developed the role of the special forces. No longer were they just supporting troops, they were a vanguard, striking a blow at the enemy, trailblazing a new string to their bow.
March 2003. The 4th Infantry Division, which Franks wanted to use in northern Iraq before Turkey closed the door, is still en route to its new position in the south. Military experts all say that in order to hit the start button for war, Franks must wait until it is in position. Franks hopes the Iraqis are listening, because it's not true. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions from 10th Special Forces leave their holding base in Europe and begin their insertion into northern Iraq.
They would be loaded onto a C-17 or C-130 cargo aircraft with their vehicles and equipment, flown down through the western Mediterranean, up through Jordan and western Iraq, to land at an airfield in northern Iraq. Then they would roll off, meet up with their Peshmerga counterparts, and roll into battle.
The 3rd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces is poised at an undisclosed holding base in the Mediterranean. 60 years earlier, Europe in June 1944. As the D-Day clock counts down, the men and women of the resistance and Allied special operations, after 3 dangerous years in Nazi-occupied France, also await the signal for action. Their activities will be coordinated by Jedbras, 2 or 3-man teams made up of SOE or OSS personnel. The British SAS have been pulled back from Italy to recruit, train, and prepare for D-Day. June 5th, 1944, the day before D-Day, and March 19th, 2003, the day before Operation Iraqi Freedom. Time to see if the objectives can be achieved. Time for action. Europe, June 5th, 1944. And Iraq, March 19th, 2003. The time has come for the climax of the execution phase of both Special Operations battle plans. The Allied invasion fleet closes in on the beaches of Normandy. In the skies above it, the Jedbras and SAS and OSS raiding teams are already en route to drop sites behind enemy lines. French resistance personnel hear the coded message they've been waiting for from the BBC in London and move to their attack positions. 3 years in the making, the coordinated campaign to cut German reinforcement and supply routes and disrupt command and control systems swings into action. On June 6th, OSS Operation Percy Red parachutes into the Limousin region. June 7th, Operation Donald into Brittany. June 8th, Operations Antagonistic and Percy Pink into the Haute-Vienne and Dordogne. Then Operations Patrick, Lindsay, Christopher, and Adrian. Also on June 8th, after a 2-day delay due to bad weather, the first OSS group flies from Algeria to southern France. Its mission? Deny the German army the use of vital rail links in the Lot region. June 9th, Operation Justine jumps in to strengthen the resistance on the Vercors Plateau. All these operations have a marked effect in disrupting the flow of German reinforcements during the early days of the landing, but at a cost. D-Day +1. The powerful SS 2nd Panzer Division, Das Reich, is ordered to leave its barracks in Montauban in southern France for the Normandy beachhead. It should take just 3 days to reach the battle zone. Its 15,000 battle-hardened troops and 209 tanks and assault guns will make a crucial difference if they reach Normandy in time. But resistance forces intervene, taking the town of Toul, close to the German route. Das Reich must divert to retake it. Infuriated by the delay, on the 9th of June, the SS men run amok, seizing 120 civilians and hanging 99 of them in revenge. On the same day, while searching for one of their battalion commanders who has been captured by the resistance, other Das Reich troops kill 642 innocent civilians, almost the entire population of Oradour-sur-Glane. The men are herded into barns and shot, the women and children murdered in the church. Das Reich is supposed to reach Normandy on June 10th. It doesn't get there until the 20th. But places like Oradour stand as a stark reminder of the dangers special operations can bring. The ruins of the village remain as a memorial to the horrors. March 19th, Washington, nearly 60 years later. U.S. President Bush imposes a 48-hour deadline on Saddam Hussein. 2 days later, at 0400 local time, President Bush's deadline expires. 90 minutes later, explosions are heard in Baghdad. On the southern border, the Australian SAS crosses into Iraq in strength. Also in the south, the 2nd Battalion of the U.S. 5th Special Forces Group begins reconnaissance in key locations, including Basra and Karbala. In the north, 2nd and 3rd Battalions of 10th Special Forces Group move forward to engage. 3rd Battalion, 3rd Special Forces Group flies in secretly to join them. In the south, the tanks of the U.S. 3rd Armored Infantry Division race up west of the Euphrates. Meanwhile, U.S. Marines and British troops assault the oil fields and head for Basra.
These operations were conducted in the full glare of international publicity. They were being backed live to America. They were on everybody's television sets. The war in the north and in areas of the desert conducted by special forces was very different.
Special operations are always shrouded in mystery and secrecy because they often are aimed at sensitive targets. They are also using usually the latest weaponry and the latest intelligence. That information falling into enemy hands could undermine future special operations, and so secrecy was absolutely crucial.
This photograph is part of that secrecy. Special clearance was needed to show it. As U.S. tanks thunder north, one fear is that they will be held up at what the military call choke points. One is the Karbala Gap, just south of Baghdad. Special Forces Team 551 is inserted, sets up a hide, and calls in airstrikes to make sure the gap is not closed. These are photographs of the actual hide, deep behind enemy lines. Team 551 remains in place 10 days.
The reconnaissance mission that Team 551 did was absolutely essential because when 3rd Mechanized Infantry Division rolled through the Karbala Gap a few days later, they rolled through. That place was not a choke point, it was not a killing ground, it was just another piece of highway.
U.S. Navy SEALs and Polish commandos seize the oil platforms. British Royal Marines and Special Boat Service take the Four Peninsula. SAS and U.S. Special Forces ensure that there are no Scud sites in the western half of Iraq. U.S. 173rd Airborne Brigade parachutes onto Iraqi airfield H-3 and secures it. Waiting on the ground are U.S. Special Forces operatives. In the north, the unseen war also begins. The key will be the battles along the Green Line, separating Kurdish territory from the Iraqi forces stationed north of Baghdad. Special operation teams and Peshmerga must pin them down, and then try to open the way to the city of Kirkuk and the northern oil fields. One critical battle is fought at the Debeka Pass. The Special Operations Forces in northern Iraq have a Forward Operating Base, or FOB, which is in overall command. The FOB controls 3 Special Forces Company headquarters, known as Operational Detachment Bravos, or ODBs. Each ODB controls 4 to 6 teams, 10 to 12-man detachments, called Operational Detachment Alphas, or ODAs, the famous A-teams. On April 4th, 2003, 4 days after the start of the campaign, U.S. Special Forces in northern Iraq launch Operation Northern Safari. ODB 390 from 3rd Group and 4 of its A-teams are assigned the mission, plus ODA 044 from 10th Group. These teams would soon find themselves engaged in a bitter, bloody struggle with some of Saddam's elite armored divisions. What happens next will fundamentally redefine the future operational use of special forces in combat. Northern Iraq, 2003. U.S. Special Forces A-teams spearhead Peshmerga units to occupy the western end of a ridge running along the strategically critical Green Line. They aim to pin down Saddam's northern forces, while the main coalition assault in the south races toward Baghdad. More forces will then outflank the Green Line, move east, and strike toward Kirkuk. A small number of camera crews are with the Peshmerga force. April 6th, A-teams go ahead. The Peshmerga follow, ready to attack. The 3rd Battalion was originally assigned to the Western Desert to hunt Scud missiles. It has new and lethal ground mobility vehicles, GMVs. It has trained on the new Javelin anti-tank missile. It also has its own special supply vehicles, War Pigs, so the A-teams will not have to leave their positions to be resupplied. Each A-team can also call in air support. From F-14s and F-A-18s operating off carriers in the eastern Mediterranean, and giant B-52s from RAF Fairford in Britain. This is crucial in what is about to happen. 1700 hours, the A-teams call in B-52 airstrikes to begin the demolition of the Iraqi defenses. 0401 hours the next morning, 2 more B-52s bomb the ridge. 0600, ODAs 391 and 392 link up with their column of 80 Peshmerga fighters. Liaison Special Forces from ODA 044 are also present. They move south toward a crossroad protected by a minefield. Peshmerga forces try to breach an earthen berm ahead of the Iraqi line. The ODAs give supporting fire. The ODAs receive intelligence that an Iraqi armored battalion with tanks and personnel carriers has moved back from the crossroad. At the crossroad, they find an abandoned T-55 tank. This tank will prove crucial in what happens later. The American ODAs breached the berm and moved south again toward a highway along the ridge line. The Peshmerga assemble at the crossroad by the abandoned tank. These stills were taken at the crossroads. Special high-level clearance has been necessary to use them for this program. 0940. The two A-teams and their GMVs are exposed. They pull back to a small ridgeline as Iraqi tanks and armored personnel carriers emerge from a morning mist. From the ridge, nicknamed the Alamo, the A-teams call in an airstrike and fire on the advancing tanks and troop carriers with Javelin anti-tank missiles. The enemy halts. At the crossroad, ODA-44 is also engaged with the enemy, using Javelin anti-tank missiles. Shortly before 1000 hours, two Navy F-14 Tomcats launch laser-guided bombs intended for the Iraqi tanks. But tragically, the first Tomcat targets the abandoned tank at the crossroad and the Peshmerga column gathered around it. It is devastating. The ODAs on the ridge face a harsh decision. They are locked in a gun battle with Iraqi tanks, but their Peshmerga allies are lying dead and wounded.
The accidental bombing of the Peshmerga at the crossroads could have been a disaster for the battle, because the Special Forces might have thought, okay, we need to pull back and take care of our own.
Instead, the Special Forces teams divide up. Some race back to tend the wounded. The rest continue to take on the Iraqi tanks and infantry.
This was a critical point in the battle. Had the Special Forces turned their backs, they could very well have found that the Iraqis charged at them. These aggressive, these ferocious forces could well have taken the initiative. As it was, they stood their ground, and it was a turning point in the battle.
The Peshmerga column and the press vehicles are burning. Fuel and ordnance are exploding. 17 Peshmerga and a BBC cameraman are killed. 45 men are wounded, including 2 Special Forces soldiers. Troops from ODA 391 tend the wounded. In front of them, the battle continues. The Iraqi T-55s are still in position, close to the crossroads, but behind cover. The rest of the ODAs take out Iraqi tanks and vehicles. They recall the Tomcats back into action and direct them onto the proper target. FA-18 Hornets pick up the attack. 10:40 hours. Most of the wounded have been evacuated. The A-teams are almost out of Javelin missiles. Fortunately, the war pigs arrive with resupplies, just as the Iraqis start to close in. By 1600 hours, the battle is won. To the west, after a similar fierce engagement against Iraqi armor and artillery, other ODAs break the Iraqi forces on the flank. The way south is now open. April 9th, Baghdad falls, and television images are flashed live around the world. Special operations don't get a mention, but in their secret world, they wouldn't have it any other way. France, 1944. 2 weeks after D-Day, the Allied beachhead is secure. The Germans are still fighting fiercely, using their mighty Tiger tanks and 88mm anti-tank guns to lethal effect in the hedges and small fields of the Normandy bocage. Progress is slow, but within another 6 weeks, the Allies will break out and begin their blitzkrieg to liberate France and Belgium. How did the Allies in 1944 and the coalition in 2003 meet the key requirements in the battle plan for special operations? Objective: In the build-up for D-Day, the planners were correct in seeing the disruption of German reinforcements as a vital strategic objective. In Iraq in 2003, General Franks was correct in his judgment that Special Forces could stand in for the U.S. 4th Infantry Division. Build-up. Despite the best efforts of the Gestapo, Allied Special Operations were able to build up resistance networks with significant military value before D-Day. In Operation Iraqi Freedom, General Franks was able to take advantage of Special Forces personnel already in the Kurdish areas and the rapport they had established with the Peshmerga. Insertion. In France, SOE and OSS developed effective methods of inserting secret agents by parachute, aircraft, or boat. In Iraqi Freedom, Special Forces also developed efficient insertion methods using helicopters or special vehicles. The Iraqis had little idea of how much activity had taken place before hostilities began. Execution. The pre-D-Day deception operations were superb in holding back the panzers, but there is still debate over how effective the resistance really was.
During the Overlord landings, the resistance manages quite a few spectacular victories against the Germans. The effect of these upon the overall operation, however, was relatively minor.
It wasn't just the physical effects of special operations that one needs to look at. It's also the psychological effects, if you like, the hidden effects. The Germans had to protect themselves. They had to attach a company of infantry to each convoy. They had to use the Gestapo to try and winkle out the operatives. They had to be introverted, when really they needed to think much more about how they were going to push the Allies back into the sea.
In Iraq, execution is deadly. The classic special operations in the south succeed in all their objectives, while in the north, the Special Forces teams demonstrate a whole new level of effectiveness. But after Iraqi Freedom, as memories of the Blitzkrieg advance to Baghdad fade, and U.S. and coalition forces become bogged down in combating irregular forces, what is the future for the Special Operations Battle Plan?
The roles of the Special Operations and Special Forces haven't really changed over the years, but the technology has. Now technology allows things to be done with much greater precision, much greater accuracy, at greater range, and at much higher speed. And this makes the Special Operations potentially that much more destructive to the enemy.
As the nature of warfare changes, Special Operations only become a more vital and more potent weapon in any commander's arsenal. Wherever they're asked to fight, in whatever role. But one thing is certain. Stealth remains the most sacred principle of Special Ops teams. The enemy must never know they're there, or what they're doing, until it's too late.